Importance of Geology and Quarrying. We're very pleased to have Ruth Allington here presenting for us. Many of you will know Ruth already. I'm sure she's familiar to lots of you. For anybody who doesn't know Ruth, Ruth is an engineering geologist with, am I right in saying 40 years experience plus? Yeah, 40 years experience in the sector, designing quarries, open pit mines, and working with the quarrying sector. She's the current JOLSOC president. She's a trustee of the Pan-European Reserves Council Committee, a former trustee of the Institute of Quarrying, former president of the European Federation of Geologists, and as many of you will know, she pretty much wrote the book on quarry design, quite literally. So yeah, we're very grateful to have her here presenting for us this afternoon. I'll hand over to Ruth, but if I could just ask everybody to turn your cameras off. It can be very distracting for the speaker and for others on the webinar when there's things happening in the background. And most importantly, if you could all mute your microphones, please. We will have questions at the end. Please put those in the chat, or you can ask the questions in person once the presentation's over. So at that, I'll hand it over to yourself, Ruth. Thank you.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much, Otto. It's lovely to be here. It's a bit of a throwback, isn't it, to the pandemic, sitting at my desk. But actually, it's quite a convenient way to give a presentation because I can see my speaking notes and I can look at you all while I'm speaking, which I might not do quite so successfully in person. But I'm sorry about the question and answer won't be in person because that's always a lot easier to handle. When we get to that, if my slides are still on the screen, because of the way I've got my screen set up, I might not be able to see the chat very easily. So I'll rely on you, Otto, to feed any questions to me that are on the chat, or of course, very happy to answer them live. So the importance of geology and quarrying. I've got these themes. I want to talk to you about the challenges of extracting raw materials responsibly. And I'm particularly going to highlight the roles that geologists play in achieving responsible mineral extraction. I'm going to focus on quarries for the extraction of construction materials, but I'll also touch on larger scale, long-term open pit mining to illustrate some of my points, just because I've got some nice slides which are taken from that sector. So I'm going to start by stating the obvious, or it's at least obvious to this audience, I'm sure, and it's obvious to most people when they think about it, when it's drawn to their attention. If you can't grow it, you have to mine it. Mining is unpopular generally with society, and by mining, I'm bracketing in quarrying, a necessary evil perhaps, even when it's accepted that what comes out of the ground is essential not only to our ways of life, but also to the energy transition that is such a vital element of the actions needed to meet climate change targets, not to mention infrastructure development associated with economic growth, but also with adaptation to inevitable climate change. To an extent, many people are disinterested or they're neutral about mining and quarrying until, that is, it creeps closer to their own backyards, literally in relation to quarrying for construction materials, but no less immediately when supply-demand problems for critical minerals start to impact our daily lives and our aspirations for clean energy, for example, or electric cars and so on. Even though the mines for those may be in other countries, may be a long way away from our backyards. My experience is that young people particularly are incredibly passionate about addressing the climate crisis, saving the planet, preserving ecosystems, low carbon technologies, but not so keen perhaps on mining and quarrying. In some universities, students come under a lot of pressure not to consider careers in the quarrying and mining industries, characterized as dirty, damaging, irresponsible, or profiteering. And all of this puts pressure, of course, on the pipeline for skilled individuals in our industry. Alongside striving for best practice in environmental and social aspects of sustainability, which I know is an absolutely central pillar of everybody who's working in this sector, all the companies, and people. An important sustainability focus for our industry should, in my view, be inspiring the brightest and most passionate graduates in all disciplines relevant to quarrying to join the industry instead of campaigning against it. That way, they can genuinely use their talents and passion to make a positive difference through contributing to transformation to low carbon economy, supply of the raw materials needed to support the energy transition and climate change adaptation, and excellence in environmental and social performance. Of course, it doesn't end with recruitment. We all know from our working lives that it's important to motivate, train, educate, and care for our workforce. Otherwise, they vote with their feet, especially in a time of a skills shortage. And it's also important to, and this is a related point, to ensure that fine words in annual reports committing to the highest aspirations for ESG are genuinely part of the culture and practice from top to bottom. This diagram summarizes the quarry life cycle from planning and design of operations through the operational phase to post-closure and the mineral supply chain stages that are relevant at each life cycle phase. I think you probably might pick a hole, well, I might pick a hole in this diagram, in that transport of quarry products is still a mineral supply chain stage at the post-closure phase, but other than that, I think it's reasonably accurate. Sorry, I just pressed the wrong button. There we go. So here we are at the planning and design phase. You can see there the activities that are important at this stage. They're listed in approximate chronological order of when they start. But as we'll go on to see, there's a good deal of iteration that needs to go on for this phase to be successful in achieving the objectives for quarry design that I set out in my abstracts, which were the safe, efficient, and profitable extraction of the maximum usable material from the available land, whilst causing the minimum of environmental and social disturbance, and resulting in beneficial final restoration and land uses and public acceptance. Quarry design, obviously, well, probably obviously, starts with the geology. And so geologists, of course, have an essential role to play in identifying and quantifying a deposit. As I'll go on to show, whilst this work happens first, it is not an activity that happens in isolation or as a one-off. Geologists of various stripes, exploration geologists, engineering geologists, hydrogeologists, geochemists, whoever they may be, have important roles to play throughout the planning and design phase if it is to be successful in meeting those objectives. At the operational phase, we are excavating the rock and revealing the geology. It's incredibly important that the geological model we created at the early stages, when we've done our drilling, our pitting, maybe there's some faces we can log. It's important that this is updated in the light of what can be seen in the faces, and it's important that we're monitoring the quality and characteristics of the material after processing too. Is it what we expected? Do we need to make any changes in the quarry or in the process? In some operations where geology is really complex or quality variation must be controlled, this will require a geologist or team of geologists on site or available to the site at all times or very frequently to map faces, take samples, update structural models, update geochemical models and quality release schedules, etc. In others, where quality is consistent or geology is as expected, this level of geological input may be unnecessary. What will always be necessary, however, at the operational stage is adherence to the quarries regulations in this country, but there will be regulations that apply elsewhere. The important roles that engineering geologists and geotechnical engineers have to play there are probably well known to most of you. So I'm not going to say very much about this today, other than that the quarries regulations set out a risk and competence-based approach to managing health and safety in quarries. which is completely consistent with the risk-based approach to quarry design and environmental and social impact assessment that I'm going to talk about. In relation to quarry design, if we produce quarry designs and present them as part of planning applications for new or extended operations, and these designs, when they're implemented, could not meet the requirements of the quarries regulations and/or could not be implemented efficiently or at all, that is not a sustainable or responsible design, even if it gets the green light from the planners. An example might be that the haul roads in the design are too steep and/or too narrow to be operated safely, and that a redesign would be impossible without either sterilising reserves or changing key environmental impacts, noise, dust, visual impact, for example. And I'll go on to give you some examples of that sort of thing. Post-closure phase, this is obvious stuff, but what is perhaps less obvious is that a successful quarry design anticipates what the new land, its ground conditions and its uses and ecology will be as an integral element of the design. And you'll see a little bit later that this element, the design of the final restoration landform and the after uses, actually comes at the beginning of the design process. ESG, this is the acronym of our time. You've probably come across it in relation to pensions and other investments. Investors in mining and quarrying are becoming ever more demanding about ESG performance. Environmental, social and governance issues, E, S and G, are reflected here as an intertwined rope to demonstrate the interconnectedness between the disciplines. Governance is viewed as the third strand. It's a critical driver of performance in the environmental and social spaces, as well as commercially. I really like this representation. It's different from the three interlocking circles that is also commonly shown as a nice visualization of ESG. But it demonstrates that interconnectedness and the need for managing risks holistically to make all strands of the rope equally strong, and the whole to be stronger than the parts. It's important to manage these risks holistically from boardroom to site, not just concentrating on each topic individually. Quarry designs must be suitable to allow environmental impacts to be assessed at all operating stages, as well as forming the basis for safe and efficient operations. They must therefore be based on a sound understanding of the ground model and the properties of the rock masses to be excavated, and of waste materials in spoil heaps, settlement lagoons and tailings facilities. Monitoring is important, as is iterative risk assessment and management as excavation proceeds. This is a world of uncertainty, and the consequences of getting it wrong have a profound impact on E, S and G. And this is why design based on risk identification and management is so vital. Geologists are right in there in many ways, but particularly in terms of the ground model and the design of the pit, which influences, of course, what its environmental impacts will be. Geoscientists, and specifically those with their boots on the ground right at the beginning, exploration geologists, are usually repeatedly and over many years first in at the site with progressively more detailed site investigation to reduce uncertainties and to inform the decision to go or no go, and feeding into the design process. But they have a vital role to play in establishing relationships with local people, in hearing about their needs and concerns, in noticing evidence of former land uses, ground conditions, sacred places, etc. This is often underestimated. Geoscientists generally, I find, really love geology. They love their part of geoscience. and that's what they're happiest doing. But they're also they also have this role to play, but it's only helpful in design if somehow it permeates through to the next stages. Governance considerations determine the DNA of an organization. They usually also determine its policies in respect of environmental and social performance. It's the framework within which risk management happens or should happen. It's the underpinning of culture, and it determines whether risk and operational areas are silos or are interconnected. How a company is governed and the manner in which it conducts its business directly relates to the confidence that investors will have in the ability of that company to be a good caretaker of its investment. Internal company controls, ethics, and compliance status, including in respect of environmental and social aspects alongside all of its other risks, drives the reputation of the company as a good neighbour and a worthy investment. Where there is a mismatch between what the annual report says about ESG policies and performance and what happens on the ground, this will soon be rooted out and publicly exposed. I want to show you 3 examples of failure in ES or G, or arguably all 3. The first one is the Bingham Cannon failure. On April the 10th, 2013, 2 massive landslides sent about 145 million tonnes of waste into the largest copper mine in the US. The question in my mind is, why on earth had this hazard not been identified when the mine was planned? Undercutting of bedding in open pits is a geotechnical setting we always work hard to avoid in open pit design. This cost an enormous amount of money to recover from and increased the footprint of the mine very significantly because the slopes had to be flattened significantly. It was predictable, it was avoidable, way before the immediate warning signs were apparent, even though the incident itself was very well managed. Despite being predicted by monitoring several months before, and the unfolding situation managed to ensure no fatalities, this failure put people in harm's way and cost an enormous amount of money to recover from. 3 shovels at $45 million apiece, 14 dump trucks at $5 million apiece, before you even start counting the cost in lost production, millions of cubic meters of waste to be moved, and erosion of profitability through stratospherically high stripping ratios. It also increased the footprint of an already enormous mine because the slopes had to be flattened. It was predictable and avoidable. Now, this is in the UK. It's a failure at St Aidan's open cast coal site. This is in West Yorkshire. It's really clear to everyone when there's been a failure to take proper account of ESG risks. This particular disaster, where the River Aire flowed into the St Aidan's site, flooded the St Aidan's site, led to the development of the Open Cast Code of Practice, which was a precursor to the 1999 Quarries Regulations, as it happens. And then finally, we go to Australia. This image was part of an article on the BBC website on the 24th of August 2020, with the caption, "Yukon George Cave Site Before and After Mining Works." In fact, the bottom picture was after stripping and drilling and charging of blast holes, but before the blast that destroyed ancient rock shelters. It represents the point of no return in the destruction of a site with evidence of human habitation 46,000 years ago. Just to put that in context, pyramids were 4,500 years ago, Stonehenge 5,200, Machu Picchu 600, Great Wall of China 2,250. And Uluru, first human settlement at Uluru, Australia, was 10,000 years ago. It's a bit like the Highway Authority deciding to put a massive road cutting through Stonehenge and doing it at dead of night. Rio Tinto, the operator, knew about these caves. They had invested a lot in archaeological studies and in stakeholder engagement with those to whom the site is sacred. But somehow the guys on the ground and the drillers and the shot firers and the pit superintendent who planned and authorised the overburden stripping were not aware of any of that and went ahead. It's not believed they chose to ignore it. The competent person, a geologist or mining engineer, I'm not sure which, who was responsible for estimating and disclosing to investors resources and reserves at the site, must have overlooked the fact that the caves were there in order to classify the rock as a mineable reserve. And I'll come to the classification of reserves shortly. But this reputational, cultural and social performance disaster came about through a colossal failure of governance, by which I mean a failure of communication and joined up thinking. Those were the main casualties. These risks were not managed or even part of a common understanding of what was important, where the red lines were. Rio has an international reputation for innovation and research, and it's well deserved. It's signed up to a list of ESG standards and accords as long as your arm, and employs thousands of really excellent people. And yet, unlike the story of the emperor's new clothes, nobody called it out before it was too late. On a much smaller scale, I wonder how many of you can think of a similar salutary tale that perhaps didn't hit the headlines in such a big way. As you can see from these headlines, investors and shareholders are demanding more from companies than simple legal compliance. They have significant influence over companies with whom they've entrusted their money. I could show you countless local, national and international headlines are highlighting what the public think and expect as well. We're in quite a demanding and public industry. I'm going to move on now to consider what sustainability, responsible extraction, good quarry design looks like in practice. So this is a simple visualization of what we're aiming to achieve at a site-specific level in open pit design. The dashed lines around the key outcomes represent permeable disciplinary boundaries and the need for all the various disciplines to work together in a holistic, collaborative way to achieve a quarry design that has achieved all of the objectives, taking account of all the interactions. The double-headed arrows signify the iteration and checking back that is needed. As I want to demonstrate to you, failure to achieve a proper balance between the broad objectives or a failure to communicate this balance effectively to stakeholders, even if it is achieved, benefits no one. An incomplete or ill-considered design may lead to unacceptable environmental or social impacts, nuisance or danger to the public, danger to the workforce, or additional monitoring and enforcement costs for public authorities. I hope it goes without saying in this audience that it all starts with and depends on the rock, and therefore that geoscientists, particularly exploration geologists, engineering geologists, geotechnical engineers, and hydrogeologists have a pivotal role to play. So nurture them. If you're not one yourself, please nurture them. So here's the classification system that underpins standards for reporting mineral resources, solid mineral resources and mineral reserves. It's the classification used in what are called the CRISCO family of codes and standards, which are required to be used by mining and quarrying companies listed on all major international stock exchanges when they make public reports on their mineral resources and reserves. And also large unlisted companies use these codes and standards, as do some smaller concerns. And fellows of the Geological Society are obliged to report their resource and reserves work in accordance with the code and conduct. The code of conduct requires them to report in line with the Crisco codes and standards, and most specifically the PERC standard. As you can see with the coloured blue and red arrows, the classification system has a geological aspect. Investigations and modelling that increase geological confidence in the deposit under consideration are the blue, is on the vertical axis, the blue arrows. And there are also non-geological aspects, collectively called modifying factors, which determine how much of the deposit can be economically, practically, and safely extracted without unacceptable environmental and social impacts. Reports are prepared on exploration results in mineral deposits in accordance with this classification for the purpose of informing investors or potential investors and their advisors, and actually many other stakeholders who take an interest, so that they can understand the risks associated with given projects. And for investors, they can compare with alternative investment opportunities. What else could I do with my money? And with comparable risk, and therefore decide, what to do with their money. These are the main principles governing the operation of and application of the standards, and the resulting preparation of public reports and other disclosures. If you want to know more about this, you can find the definitions of these terms in all of the codes and standards in the Crisco family, and I particularly commend the PERC standard to you, as this is the European, including UK member of the family, and it's the most recent. It's had the most recent update, and I'm on the committee, and of course I think it's the best. It's certainly very readable. So now to return to the classification diagram. The vertical axis is the responsibility of geologists who have appropriate expertise and professional credentials in modelling and understanding the mineral deposit. The work may involve many people and take place over many years as more information is collected and confidence builds in estimates of the quality, quantity, and disposition of minerals in the ground. Along the bottom of the diagram, we see that many appropriately qualified professionals are involved in considering and optimizing the modifying factors. And now you see the diagram overlain by the standard definitions of mineral resources and mineral reserves. What I want to point out for the purpose of this talk is that to classify a mineral resource, so that is when you have, let me go back, when you have reasonable geological confidence or high geological confidence, but you haven't yet got to demonstrating that extraction could be reasonably justified, there must be reasonable prospects for eventual economic extraction. So before you've got very far with your design, when you're still looking mostly at the deposit, in order to classify a resource, you need to be able to show that you have reasonable prospects for eventual economic extraction. This diagram illustrates a tried and tested approach to quarry design that seeks to avoid the nasty surprises that I've described. Finding out that you haven't got any prospects of eventual economic extraction by the time you've done a lot of work, or even perhaps have got planning permission and have made a start. You'll find a diagram, perhaps not in exactly that format, in the Quarry Design Handbook. I and colleagues at GWP Consultants LLP and David Jarvis Associates Limited developed this approach in the Quarry Design Handbook that I've just mentioned. That was published in 2014, so it's now 10 years old. and used it extensively on numerous quarry projects in the UK and elsewhere, starting actually in the late 1980s. You may notice that there is just one arrow that is not double-headed on the diagram. That is the one that goes underneath the word resources. So I've combined the two diagrams in a sense, in that I've shown where what you have to do to get to resources, and that's the conceptual design. It's the one that leads from initial conceptual design to detailed design. At the initial conceptual design phase, we consider the key constraints and risks to identify one or more options for the site that have, here are these words again, reasonable prospects for eventual economic recovery. If there's an option that has reasonable prospects, taking into account design risks and site selection and strategic issues, which you can see listed there on the slide, only then do we progress to detailed design. This involves all relevant specialists and stakeholders working collaboratively and in a coordinated way to avoid silos developing. I wonder whether the outcome at Bingham Cannon, for example, might have been different if an effective conceptual design had been carried out and/or changes to the pit design over time had been fully risk assessed in that sort of a way. Who knows? I'm going to use an example now, loosely based on a real scenario in the UK from my experience way back, probably in the late 80s, I should think, where the holistic process described previously didn't unfold as expected by the company that acquired this site. This site, which had been evaluated by a geologist to contain a deposit of limestone that could be classified as a measured resource, that is, to remind you, having high geological confidence and reasonable prospects of eventual economic extraction. The price was based on the quantity of stone, the crushed rock aggregate, the price of the land, the site, assessed by the geologist to be recoverable. The planning authority was encouraging to the company about the prospects for gaining planning permission at the site, and the company appointed a team of consultants to prepare a planning application and environmental statements. They held a public exhibition to let the local people know what was proposed in broad outline. The disciplines represented in the consultant team included engineering geology and open pit design, that was GWP, and a full range of environmental specialisms, and of course planning. So all the right people were there. The site is long and narrow. It's aligned north-south, and this cross-section is representative of an east-west cross-section through it. It soon became apparent to the engineering geologists and quarry designers that the steep inclination of the strata on the east, so that's the right-hand side of this diagram, gave rise to a geotechnical setting that, in combination with the steep eastern excavated face, would give rise to a significant risk of the face failing along one of the bedding planes. You can see that the original proposed face, which is in red dashes, here, you can see my cursor, would have undercut the beds of rock, and that this hadn't been appreciated by the person who wrote the resource report, who was incidentally no longer available, wasn't on the team, wasn't taking calls. Such a slope failure would obviously be dangerous to personnel working in the pit, and hence contrary to the quarries regulations, although this was pre-quarries regulations, and could potentially close the pit entirely if it disrupted haulage routes and blocked working faces. It would have been impossibly expensive to stabilise the faces using rock bolts, and the only viable option was to flatten the eastern face so as to eliminate undercutting of bedding surfaces, leading to the unsafe geotechnical setting. The client's proposal of moving the eastern excavation to the east, excavation limit to the east, and diverting the stream was not acceptable because of the ecological importance of the stream. And so the only option was to maintain the position of the eastern excavation limit and lose a significant proportion of the volume believed to be available, originally believed to be available. This was more than 50%. And this happened really early on in the project that we were all undertaking. Quite difficult news to give to the client. The geologist who wrote the resource report didn't appreciate the serious safety implications of the adverse geotechnical setting or the impact of remedial measures on viability of the project. No conversation took place at resource estimation stage with a geotechnical specialist or a mining engineer, and the geologist didn't have any of that in his background. Neither did the client, or in fact their geologist, read or understand the ecological report commissioned at the time of the geologist's assessment. On top of the problems with the east wall design, it emerged that the amount of space allowed between the western site boundary and the pit limit for the storage of waste rock, that's the Upton sandstone, the yellow rock, was insufficient to accommodate the volumes that would arise in a tip that will have stable slopes and account for bulkage of the material. You can see how big the tip would need to be in the yellow dashed line and how much how much we could fit in that strip. The quarry design team suggests that the problem can be solved by buying more land outside the site boundary to the west, but that was ruled out by the planning and social engagement specialists. The neighbour is the chair of the local action group. He's got his own development aspirations that would be adversely impacted by quarrying next door, and he was never contacted during the site investigation. The only available resource left after this further modification is probably a third of what was assessed as being available and upon which the sale proceeded. This is a slightly exaggerated version of a real situation that arose at a similar site. But it does illustrate where failure to consider the modifying factors early in the mining life cycle, in the quarrying life cycle, can get you. And by contrast, the benefits of including everybody, working collaboratively and iteratively with everybody. The unforeseen but not unforeseeable problems that rose in the example I've given could have been avoided if assumptions had been questioned at the earliest possible stage, and certainly before investing in the site. I've put on the slide there the key questions that we need to be asking ourselves as we work through that diagram with all the double-headed arrows and one single-headed arrow. So I hope it's reasonably clear from what I've said already that whilst success in responsible design of mineral operations is fundamentally based on the rock, that is the quality and quantity of the deposits, and on deployment of a wide range of technical expertise, these are really not sufficient on their own. It's really all about the people. There is a huge advantage, and it's all about governance, of course. There is a huge advantage when we acquire skills and perspectives alongside technical expertise and establish cultures and governance structures that promote collaborative working based on genuine dialogue. So firstly, corporate governance structures and processes that enable and encourage interdisciplinary cooperation. That's often enormously difficult. It's not so difficult at the operational stage, but it's really difficult at the planning stage, where some divisions and departments are seen as responsible for for planning, and there'll be a geological department, there'll be a planning department, there might be an environmental department, and so on. What we say we'll do is what we'll do, is what we need to get to when we're ensuring that culture and policy set at the top is embedded through the whole organisation. The value, what we are aiming for is that the values that we project are the values we live by. And that's, as we see from the Yukon Gorge incident, which could have been very different if more attention had been paid to this, is really quite difficult to do. And mistakes are very, very costly, in this case, in terms of reputation. Top to bottom awareness of overlaps and interrelationships between disciplinary areas. Knowing what you don't know, when to call in an expert, when to phone a friend, which one to phone, knowing why your bit matters and who else in the team it's likely to matter to. Learning to be courageous and skilled in listening mostly and telling people stuff less. This goes for those in, for stakeholders, understanding stakeholders, community stakeholders, investment stakeholders, but also between our departments, between our disciplines. What you told somebody in any walk of life is not necessarily what they actually heard. What you heard them say to you is not necessarily what they meant you to hear, especially in conflict situations. And you're getting a little clue there as to what I mostly do these days, which is I act as a mediator. Well, I've been acting as a mediator. I've been a qualified mediator since the mid-1990s. And I must say, it's a professional skill that I would commend to everybody, whether they do formal mediation or not. Widespread ability and courage to communicate in language accessible to the whole range of internal and external stakeholders, and especially the public and other professionals. This is not about dumbing down. It's about finding the courage to hear what you might not want to hear. If you're a person who has spent 5 years of your professional life doing your best, working very, very skillfully and at a high level on a quarry design, only to be confronted with angry people who think that you're trying to wreck their lives and that you don't care about the impact of your operation, the very worst thing you can do is to avoid speaking to them. Gaining that courage, and I'd encourage you again to look at mediation and facilitation trainings, so as to gain that courage to go into those awkward conversations, because they are absolutely transformational. If anybody's interested in this, and I'm very happy to talk to you, but I'll run out of time if I go into much detail now. And then the last of these is develop early, genuine and meaningful stakeholder relationships. Conversations and cups of tea, I call it. Bill Birch, who some of you will know, he's a blasting specialist. He often talks about community engagement from his experience of managing open cast coal mines on behalf of British Coal Opencast, before he became an academic at Leeds University. And he says, you've got to drink a lot of tea, and it's absolutely right. And it's once you get over the fear, it's such a pleasure to get to know people and drink a lot of tea. Sometimes, of course, deployment of a neutral third party is really useful to facilitate that, to drink those cups of tea for you initially until you can talk together. As I say, I don't have much time to share my experience of effective dialogue and persuasive power of listening, but I'm very happy to to talk to anybody about that, or to point them in the direction of other presentations and materials that they might find interesting. So here's the key message. We have the greatest ability and opportunity to mitigate risks at lowest cost early in the project life cycle. This chart on the screen is well sensitized and understood within mining. As time progresses, our ability to change plans or mitigate risk decreases significantly, that's the green line, and the cost of doing so increases. Things become too big to fail. The potential impact of the risk increases as well as we near execution and project completion. So I'm not going to go to those two slides. I can make my slide pack and indeed my speaking notes available if you would like them afterwards. But I can see the time, and I want to allow time for Q&A at the end. So what could usefully change? Earliest possible geological inputs to mining projects as part of integrated risk management. More geologists in quarrying and mining organisations and competent person teams integrated with other relevant disciplines. I probably should have put those words in bold. It's not the geology that's the thing, it's the integration with the other relevant disciplines. Training and education of exploration and mining geologists to see beyond mineralisation so that they know sufficient to collect important early stage information alongside their deposit focused activities, so that we can genuinely say with our colleagues in other disciplines that there are reasonable prospects for eventual economic extraction. At the very least, we all need to have sufficient knowledge to know when to phone a friend, and the same goes for other non-geological specialists. There's a really important place for the specialist generalist, which is really where I see myself as a quarry designer and facilitator. So there's some further reading there. As I said before, I'm very happy to make my slides available. And that's all I have.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ruth. Excellent presentation. I think it's pretty nicely kind of summarised the role of the geologist and the field that we're working in. It is a bit broader than just pure geology itself. Just see if we've got any questions in the chat. I don't think I can see anything at the moment, so I'd welcome anybody to raise their hand virtually if they have a question within the room. It's not just me missing anybody's questions. I can't see anything yet, but I'll just give it another minute in case anybody's furiously typing away. I think just a reflection from myself, it just goes to highlight that kind of, for the geologists in the room, it's much more than just geology, and especially in the kind of quarrying industry where the geology is perhaps relatively simple compared to the mining world. And actually those modifying factors are often equally, if not more important than the geological factors in the environments that we're working in, especially in the UK, where we are quite a densely populated nation. And I think that kind of that final point that you made there, Ruth, around the corporate governance or even your business operating model, those decisions that are made within the operations teams, you might not think they've got anything to do with your company geologist, but it can all affect the fine detail and decision made and on the cuff when you're desperate for somewhere to, for example, tip some waste and the drastic influence on the reserves and resources down the line.
Yeah,
absolutely. Operational colleagues are something taken on board, and I don't know if you want to add to that.
Well, I think the point you made about the modifying factors being very present for us in the quarrying industry as opposed to the mining industry is absolutely right. The modifying factors are present right from the beginning, because we're particularly in this country and in other developed countries, and when we're taking out, so we're extracting construction materials, these are local businesses. They're very heavy, bulky. We don't want to transport them too far to market. And so we're almost always close to communities. So it's inevitable that we need to consider those communities right from the beginning. So we find it easier to do that in a sense. We know which boxes we have to tick, but we still fall into the trap of getting a shelf full of reports, and they all have closed covers, and nobody's drawing it together. It's done more like a relay race, and then somebody draws it together as a piece of work and lands it on the planner's desk.
See if we have got any more questions. I'm still not seeing any. There's been one request to share the slides.
Oh, we've lost your audio, Otto.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, I'll have to speak a bit louder. Hopefully that's working. We've had one request to share the slides.
Well, I'll send them to you, and you can send them to the participants. That'll be
fantastic. I think there's a question within the chat. So, is there a scope for AI? And I think this probably goes for all. Is there a scope for the operator itself to undertake quarry design?
Sorry, so could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so I've got one question, I think, in the chat, and I'll open this kind of to all operating companies. Is there a scope for AI or all operating companies to undertake their own quarry design?
Are we talking about aggregate industries or artificial intelligence here?
Ah, apologies. Yeah, that's a very good point. I'm so used to saying aggregate industries. Yeah,
artificial intelligence.
Yes, so yeah,
artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stuart.
Sorry.
I have actually found the chat box, so I can put it onto my other screen. I can see it. Interesting question. I remember very well how extraordinary and amazing it was for me to put my planimeter and my tracing paper and my rotary pen on one side when I learnt how to use MOS in those days. So we didn't use we invested in machines so we could run this program MOS, and it was just extraordinary. You know, suddenly I could make three-dimensional models without spending days and days and days drawing and scratching out and then measuring with my planimeter or digitizing on the digitizer tablet later on. So I would say having some help from AI to process large amounts of data could be helpful. And probably in ways that I can't even envisage, because I'm quite a long way away from the sharp end of creating quarry designs now. But I worry about over-automation of the design process itself, because it just takes that sort of staged thought process out of it, potentially. I think we need to be very, very careful, and you can't consult with your peers, your interdisciplinary peers, through AI, and you can't have a satisfactory dialogue. I mean, you know, if your stakeholder consultation was all done a bit like a NatWest chatbot, you know, questions about your account, that really wouldn't be proper consultation. But can I ask you, Stuart, well, how would you envisage AI working in quarry design? There might be something I've missed, because I'm really old and old-fashioned now.
Well, I have to admit I'm a lawyer, Ruth. So I thought it'd be an interesting question. I do take your point about the difficulty of addressing the nuances, perhaps, of a development through using an AI system to help. But it might be a way of saving time and effort in undertaking initial design work, certainly.
Ah, yes, but it's a client told me once that a set of drawings, a set of quarry design drawings that I'd produced in the old-fashioned way with pens and coloured crayons and dye-line prints and planimeters and so on. I mean, they were a beauty to behold, this set of drawings. They had taken months and months and months. But he said, I really like working with you guys because when the result is simple and easy to understand, I know it's finished. And he knew how much effort had gone into looking with the visual impacts specialists at how we should tweak the face alignments to amend the visual and landscape impacts. How much effort had gone in with the noise specialists to get the bunding and the limits of excavation just right, and on it went, and how messy sometimes that had become, and then it all got resolved. And I don't see that AI would come out with every site is different, and geology is an interpretive science. So we're always looking at, what's the probability that we're right or probability that we're wrong. It's not like putting up a modular building where the building would be the same each time, because AI has to learn. So it could learn to do really complicated statistics on very large data sets, but that's not really what's involved in quarry design. The geologist might do some of that in order to define the deposit, but in working through and designing an excavation and a phasing of excavation and a phasing of waste disposal that will get you to the best answer. You do need humans. I think you still need humans.
You can't get away from the need for conversation and cups of tea.
Exactly. You can't get away from it. And why would you want to? I mean, how grim would your working life be?
I'm with you.
If that's what you did. And George says George Wright says it's also worth remembering that AI is not always right. Well, of course it's not, because all it can tell you is what it's gleaned from the information it can trawl from everywhere. Philip is asking for the slides. Of course, you may have the slides, Philip. No problem. There's another. Sam Lawrence. Various software developers have been working on automated pit design optimization and parametric design for some years. Yes, and I think that's a really nice example that Sam's given there, that you could very usefully use AI to chomp your way through a block model, for example, to see what the quality release schedule would be. So in a metalliferous mine, you might find it useful to do that, to refine your block modeling, and therefore to optimize your pit model. But at the end of the day, even an optimized pit model is a pit model optimized in that way is optimized for quality. It's not necessarily optimized for geotechnical setting or noise impact or dust impact or hydrogeological impact. All of these things are intertwined. So yes, of course, you need this team of competent persons to deploy their expertise. It's often said that the best geologist has seen the most rock. Well, the best quarry designer has certainly done the most quarry designs, and they've benefited from working with peers and seeing case histories of what can go bump and what can go wrong if they don't get this joined up. Communication's the thing. If AI helps you, then by all means use it, but don't rely on it.
Ruth, there is one more question in the chat which I think we've missed. It's from Andrew Tyler. And which country or organisation manages the ESG process best in the world, in your view?
difficult to say. I think we do a bloody marvellous job in this country, actually, in the quarrying industry. Our record in quarry restoration is I think second to none. I've worked in lots of places in the world where quarry restoration really isn't even a thing, and they talk about it, you know, a long way in the future. And although when there's a quarry on the horizon, you know, the placards are out and retired majors are writing letters and the planning committee is being influenced, and people are very, very unhappy and very, very frightened. My experience is that once the dust is settled, if permission is granted, most quarry operators, the vast majority of quarry operators in this country, operate very happily, very responsibly alongside their local communities. They contribute to their local communities. They listen. And I think my only plea would be that level of engagement with local people is translated much earlier in the process, so that people feel much more involved. Because that conflict can go on for a very, very long time. But no, I think we do it really well here. We've got some, you know, there are hundreds and hundreds of nature reserves in old quarries.
Thank you very much. Don't think we've got any more questions, so I think on that note, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. We've got a couple of kind of public service announcements regarding our next events for the Institute of Quarrying West of England branch. I know our chairman was having some technical issues earlier. I don't know if Gary, you're able to speak out loud, or if you're still struggling with the technology. Sounds like you're still having some problems. So in that case, I'll just jump on. So for anybody who is based in the Southwest, and I appreciate we've got quite a wide audience here today, our next technical evening for the Institute of Quarrying are their health and safety hot topics, and that will take place on the 11th of March at the Earth Science Centre. We don't have a HSE inspector themselves, however, we are fortunate enough to have, I think, 3 former health and safety executive inspectors amongst the panel. And that will be a different format from our usual evenings. It will be an interactive panel debate on what the hot topics are within our industry at the moment, and where do we need to focus on more as an industry. So I do hope you can join us in person at the Earth Science Centre on the 11th of March for that. And we are also hosting the Southwest Regional Dinner Dance on the 20th of April. Tickets are available. Time is rapidly running out if you do want to book to include the preferential rate at the hotel. And we are also looking for any sponsors. So if anybody's willing to sponsor a raffle prize, please get in touch with myself or any of our other committee members, and we can discuss that further with you. So now that those parts are done, I just want to thank Ruth one more time for giving up her time this afternoon for that excellent presentation. We'll make the slides available one way or another. And just a virtual round of applause for Ruth. Thank you very much.